The innocent beginnings. In the small village of Oloran, life was simple, yet filled with dreams. Amina, the only child of Iriti and Tond, was a beacon of joy in their lives. Her laughter filled the corners of their modest home, and her bright smile lit up the darkest of days. Amina's parents adored her. She was everything they had hoped for and more. Tond, a gentle and hardworking farmer, took pride in raising his daughter. His love for her knew no bounds, and he would often talk about how one day, Amina would make a name for herself in the world beyond their village. Iriti, a teacher, shared similar hopes for Amina, though with a quiet sense of discipline. She would often remind Amina of the importance of education, of striving for something greater, and of the value of hard work. Her dreams for Amina were grand. She hoped one day Amina would become a doctor, someone who could change lives and make a real impact. Iriti's love for her daughter was expressed through her strictness, but it was always for Amina's future. Amina was a bright girl. She was diligent in her studies and respectful of her parents' wishes. She spent her days studying, helping her mother with chores, and playing in the fields with the other children. One of her closest friends was Komo, a boy from a neighboring village who had come to Oloran to attend school. Komo was intelligent and kind, and the two quickly formed a bond over their shared love for learning. They would spend hours together under the large baobab tree, discussing books, solving problems, and dreaming of the future. Their friendship was innocent and pure, and Amina felt a deep connection with Komo, even if she didn't fully understand the emotion stirring within her heart. As time passed, Amina's mother, Iriti, began to notice how much time Amina spent with Komo. She could see that there was something special between them, but it also made her uneasy. "Amina," she would say, her voice calm but firm, "you are a young woman now. I know Komo is your friend, but you must be careful. A boy and a girl should not spend too much time together alone. People might talk, and your reputation is something you must always protect." Amina, ever obedient, nodded in agreement. She respected her mother's wishes, but a part of her felt conflicted. Komo was her closest friend, and though she didn't admit it to anyone, she had started to develop feelings for him that went beyond friendship. Every time she saw him, her heart would race a little faster. She didn't know if Komo felt the same way, but she didn't want to risk ruining their friendship or disappointing her mother. Days turned into weeks, and the time for Komo's departure arrived. Komo had been given an incredible opportunity to study abroad, an opportunity he had dreamed of for years. His family had worked hard, and his aunt in the city had arranged for him to study in a prestigious school abroad. The news was exciting for Komo, and Amina, though saddened by the thought of losing her best friend, was genuinely happy for him. She knew that this was his chance to make his dreams come true. On the day Komo was to leave, the two sat under the baobab tree, their usual spot for deep conversations. Komo was nervous but excited, and Amina tried to hide the tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm going to miss you so much, Amina," Komo said, his voice quiet. "But I'll come back one day. You'll be a doctor, I know it. And when I return, we can study together, make our dreams a reality." Amina smiled through her tears. "I'll miss you too, Komo. I know we'll both do great things. Promise me you'll come back and share everything you learn with me." "I promise," Komo said, holding her hand gently. The moment lingered between them, the unspoken words hanging in the air like the gentle breeze around them. They leaned in, and without thinking, they kissed, a soft, innocent kiss that spoke volumes more than words ever could. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but one of deep affection, of two souls connected by a bond that had only just begun to form. Amina pulled away quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected it, and for a moment, everything around her felt like it was spinning. Komo looked at her, his face flushed, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. I'm sorry," he stammered, his eyes avoiding hers. Amina shook her head, her emotions a whirlwind inside her. "It's alright," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure if it was. As Komo boarded the bus that would take him to the city, Amina felt a sense of loss, but she didn't know how to express it. The goodbye had stirred emotions in her she had never known existed, and as she watched him disappear into the distance, she felt both proud of him and afraid of what their separation might mean for their friendship. But what Amina didn't expect was how deeply the goodbye would affect her. Komo's departure left a hole in her heart, one she couldn't quite understand. The connection they shared had been so strong, so unspoken, and now that he was gone, Amina was left with only memories, and a whirlwind of emotions she had never experienced before. She found herself alone with her thoughts, torn between her responsibilities and the feelings she had buried for so long. In the days that followed, Amina tried to distract herself with her studies, but it was hard. The more she thought about Komo, the more her heart ached. She missed him, but she also felt confused. Was what they had just a fleeting moment, or was there something more to it? Her mind raced with questions, and as she walked the quiet paths of Oloren, she realized that her world had changed in ways she couldn't control. A change in life's course. After Komo left, Amina felt as though the vibrant colors of her life had faded. She woke up each day feeling heavier, as if a weight had settled on her chest that she couldn't shake off. The happiness that once defined her was replaced with an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Her friends noticed the change immediately. Amina, who had always been lively and engaged, was now distant and quiet. She barely spoke when addressed, and when she did, her voice lacked the usual brightness. Iriti, her mother, grew concerned. Amina's behavior had shifted so drastically that it seemed almost as if she was a completely different person. Her daughter had always been so full of energy, so eager to learn, but now she spent most of her time alone in her room, staring out the window with a distant expression. "Amina, my dear, what's wrong?" Iriti asked one evening, sitting down beside her daughter. "You've been acting different lately. Is something troubling you?" But Amina couldn't find the words to express what she was feeling. She didn't know how to explain it herself. She missed Komo, his presence, his words, and the quiet moments they shared. She felt confused about the kiss they had shared, unsure of what it meant, and the guilt gnawed at her. It was as if she was in a fog, disconnected from the world around her. She withdrew further, pushing away her mother's concerns and avoiding her friends, who had been persistent in trying to bring her back to her old self. As the days passed, Amina's condition worsened. She became more pale, her appetite waning, and she seemed to lose all interest in the things she once loved. Iriti's worry deepened, and after much persuasion, she took Amina to the local healer, hoping for an answer. The healer, an elderly woman known for her wisdom, examined Amina carefully. She took her pulse, observed her symptoms, and then sat back, her face grave. "Amina," she began softly, "there is something unusual here. You are showing signs of pregnancy." Iriti froze. The words hung in the air, too heavy to fully process. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what she was hearing. Pregnancy. Her daughter. But Amina was only a young girl, with so much life ahead of her. This couldn't be true. Amina had always been so careful, so responsible. "I must be mistaken," Iriti stammered, a wave of disbelief washing over her. "This can't be. She's only a child." The healer looked at her with compassion. "I wish I were wrong, but the signs are clear. You must take her to a proper doctor to confirm, but you need to prepare yourself for what is coming." Devastated, Iriti returned home with Amina, her mind racing. She needed answers. As soon as they arrived, she sat Amina down, her heart pounding. "Amina, tell me the truth," she said, trying to remain calm despite the storm brewing within her. "Is what the healer said true? Are you pregnant?" Amina's eyes filled with tears, and she lowered her head, unable to meet her mother's gaze. The weight of her actions was too much for her to bear. She felt ashamed, frightened, and confused. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "I didn't mean for this to happen, Mama. The night before Kamal left, we were together. I didn't think it would be like this. I didn't know. I thought it was just a kiss. But now, I don't know what to do." Iriti's heart shattered in that moment. Her worst fear had come to life. Her daughter, the bright, ambitious girl who had always made her proud, was now facing a reality she had never expected. Iriti didn't know how to react. Her mind was clouded with hurt, disappointment, and confusion. "How could you, Amina?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How could you let something like this happen?" Amina cried, feeling the full weight of her mistake. "I didn't mean to disappoint you, Mama. I didn't know. I don't know what I was thinking." The next few days felt like an eternity for Iriti. She couldn't escape the crushing feeling of betrayal, even though she knew deep down that Amina hadn't set out to hurt anyone. Amina's pregnancy quickly became the talk of the village, whispers following her wherever she went. Some were sympathetic, while others judged her harshly. The village elders even began to question Iriti's parenting, blaming her for not controlling her daughter's behavior. It felt as though the weight of the entire village was pressing down on her shoulders. Iriti struggled to hold her family together. She tried to maintain composure in front of Tond, but she knew that he, too, would be heartbroken by the news. When he returned home one evening, Iriti couldn't bring herself to look him in the eye. She handed him the news, the confirmation of Amina's pregnancy, and waited for his reaction. Tond's face turned ashen as he read the report. He sat down heavily, his mind reeling. This wasn't supposed to happen. His dreams for Amina, dreams of her becoming a doctor, achieving great things, had been shattered in an instant. The anger he felt was indescribable, mixed with an overwhelming sense of disappointment. How could his daughter, the one he had trusted to carry the family's legacy, have made such a mistake? "Why, Amina?" Tond asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this? I worked so hard for you, I had dreams for you, and now you've thrown it all away." Amina sobbed, her heart breaking as she faced her father's pain. She had never wanted to disappoint him, but the consequences of her actions were undeniable. She had hurt the two people who had loved her the most. Tond stood up, pacing the room. "I can't believe this. I can't believe this is happening." His voice cracked. "But I'm not going to abandon you, Amina. You're still my daughter. You made a mistake, but I'll help you get through it." His words, though tinged with disappointment, were a small comfort to Amina. She knew that she had a long road ahead of her, but she also knew that her parents, despite their heartbreak, were willing to stand by her. It wouldn't be easy, and things would never be the same, but she wasn't alone in this. She had her family, and that was the only thing that truly mattered. A new life and loss. Amina's pregnancy became the quiet burden that her family carried in their hearts. Iriti and Tond made the decision to keep the news within their small circle, shielding their daughter from the harsh judgment that loomed over her. They knew the village would speak, but they also knew that the damage had already been done. The only thing they could do now was provide Amina with the love and support she needed during this difficult time. Iriti took it upon herself to care for Amina, preparing her for the arrival of her baby. She spent hours each day sitting with her daughter, talking to her, reminding her that this wasn't the end. "We will get through this together," she would tell Amina, though the doubt in her voice was clear. It was difficult for Iriti to hide her own fear and sadness, but she tried to remain strong for Amina. Tond, on the other hand, took to his work as a farmer, burying his sorrow in the fields. Every time he looked at Amina, he saw the girl he had once dreamed of sending to the city, the girl who would become a doctor. But that future seemed so far away now. The reality of his daughter's situation was too much to bear. He tried to keep his distance, avoiding the emotional weight of it all, but it was impossible. His love for Amina was as deep as the roots of the trees that lined their land, and he couldn't escape it. The days passed slowly, and as Amina's due date approached, the weight of anticipation hung heavy in the air. Amina, though fearful of what was to come, tried to hold on to a small glimmer of hope. She had never imagined her life would take such a turn, but now, as the baby grew inside her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. The life she carried would need her, and she would do her best to be the mother it deserved. The morning of the birth arrived with a sense of urgency. Amina was in intense pain, her young body struggling to endure the pressure of labor. Iriti rushed to her side, her face pale with worry. She sent Ton to the village's medical center to fetch help, but the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Amina's labor, complicated by her age and lack of proper prenatal care, was too much for her to handle. The medical center, while equipped with basic tools, was ill-prepared for such a complicated delivery. The doctor, though experienced, was unable to provide the kind of care Amina desperately needed. Iriti sat by her daughter's side, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort as Amina cried out in pain. Ton arrived too late, his heart pounding as he rushed to the small room where Amina lay. The birth was long and painful, but when it was finally over, a sense of relief washed over the room. The baby girl, Ayatond, was born. Her tiny cries filled the space, but Amina, pale and exhausted, couldn't summon the strength to hold her newborn daughter. Iriti's heart shattered as she watched her daughter's weak, trembling body. The blood loss, combined with the exhaustion and complications, had taken its toll on Amina. She was slipping away. Tond, who had always been so strong, knelt beside his daughter's bed, his tears falling silently as he realized the truth. Amina's breathing grew shallow, and despite the frantic attempts to save her, her heart finally stopped. In that moment, the world seemed to freeze. Ton cradled his daughter's lifeless body in his arms, unable to comprehend what had just happened. His dreams for Amina, dreams of her becoming a doctor, of her changing lives, were gone, shattered in an instant. The pain of losing his only child was unbearable, a grief he could never prepare for. Iriti, who had been watching helplessly, fell to her knees beside her husband. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. Her mind was numb, her body shaking with the weight of the loss. The love of her life was gone, and now her granddaughter, Ayatond, would never know the woman who had carried her for 9 months. In the days that followed, the village mourned with Iriti and Tond. Amina's funeral was held quietly, with only the closest family and friends in attendance. The village's whispers had quieted, replaced with a deep sadness for the young girl whose life had been tragically cut short. Amina had been full of potential, a girl who could have achieved so much, but now she was just a memory, and a motherless child was left to carry her legacy. Tond, devastated by the loss, barely spoke. His grief consumed him, drowning him in darkness. He could no longer see the light, the future he had once envisioned for Amina. He blamed himself for not being there for her, for not being able to protect her from the consequences of her actions. But amidst the overwhelming sorrow, Iriti made a vow. She would not let Amina's death be in vain. She would protect Ayatond, the daughter Amina had left behind. She would love her as her own, just as Amina had once dreamed of becoming a mother. Ayatond would know the love of a family, and she would grow up knowing the memory of her mother. As Iriti cradled her granddaughter in her arms, she whispered softly, "I will keep you safe, my dear. You will know the love your mother couldn't give you, and I will ensure that you never forget her." Tond, though broken, found solace in his wife's determination. He knew that, no matter how deep his sorrow, Ayatond was the last piece of Amina he had left. He couldn't change the past, but he could help raise the future, and that future, in the form of his granddaughter, would carry the spirit of Amina. Generational healing. In the days after Amina's death, life in the small village of Oloran seemed to come to a halt. Iriti had lost the daughter she had raised with such love and care, but she had gained a new responsibility, her granddaughter, Ayatond. As she held the tiny child in her arms, Iriti made a promise to herself: Ayatond would never feel the weight of Amina's absence. She would grow up surrounded by love, compassion, and the hope that her mother's memory would live on through her. Iriti worked tirelessly to raise Ayatond as her own, nurturing her with the same care and devotion she had given Amina. She sang the lullabies Amina had once loved, told Ayatond stories of her mother's childhood, and filled her with the values that Amina had learned over the years. It was Iriti's way of ensuring that Ayatond would always know who her mother was, even if Amina could not be there to raise her. As Ayatond grew, she became a bright, curious child, her mother's spirit living on in her. Iriti made sure Ayatond received the best education she could offer, teaching her the lessons Amina had once learned. She encouraged Ayatond to dream big, to strive for greatness, and to always stay true to herself, just as she had done with Amina. Despite the loss they had both endured, Iriti remained hopeful for Ayatond's future, believing that she had the potential to achieve everything Amina had dreamed of. But in the shadows of this new beginning, Tond's heart remained heavy with grief. The death of Amina had shattered him in ways he couldn't even begin to explain. He had lost his daughter, the one who had carried the weight of his hopes and dreams. His heart was broken, and his pain ran deep. It was easier for him to stay away, to bury himself in the fields, to avoid facing the child who had come into his life under such painful circumstances. Tond could not bear to look at Ayatond. Every time he saw her, he was reminded of the daughter he had lost. His sorrow turned to bitterness, and soon it became anger. He couldn't understand why Ayatond had to come into the world in the way that she had. Every time Iriti asked him to hold the child, to interact with her, he would refuse, his face hardening with resentment. He would retreat into silence, even growling at Ayatond if she came too close. Iriti was heartbroken by her husband's behavior, but she understood the depth of his pain. She knew that Tond's grief was consuming him, and that his refusal to accept Ayatond was a form of self-inflicted punishment. But it was also hurting the child. Iriti knew she had to protect Ayatond, even if that meant bearing the brunt of Tond's anger herself. It strained their relationship, and the silence between them grew louder with each passing day. As Ayatond grew older, she began to notice the tension in the house. She could feel the distance between her grandmother and grandfather, and it hurt her deeply. She would try to seek out her grandfather, to talk to him or simply sit beside him, but Tond would push her away. Sometimes he would shout at her, his anger spilling over into words that cut through her heart. "You're just like your mother," he would growl, "you've ruined everything." Ayatond didn't understand. She was just a child, and all she wanted was to be loved. But no matter how hard she tried, Tond remained cold and distant. One evening, as the sun set over the village, Iriti found Tond sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. She had watched him suffer for months, and her heart ached for the man she once knew, a man who had been full of love, joy, and laughter, but who had now been consumed by grief. It was time to have the conversation that she had been avoiding, the conversation that she hoped would heal the wound between them. "Tond," she said softly, sitting beside him. "We can't keep going like this. You're hurting Ayatond, and you're hurting yourself. I know you miss Amina. I miss her too. But we have to move forward. For her sake." Tond's face twisted with pain as he looked at his wife. "You don't understand, Iriti. Every time I look at Ayatond, I see Amina. And it hurts. I can't love her like I loved my daughter. I can't, his voice cracked, and for the first time in months, tears welled up in his eyes. Iriti reached out, gently placing her hand on his. I understand, Tond. But Ayatond is not Amina. She is a part of her, yes, but she is her own person. She needs you, just as you need her. You're not alone in this. We are in this together. Tond looked at his wife, his heart heavy with the weight of his emotions. For so long, he had let his pain consume him. He had allowed it to control his actions and his relationship with Ayatond. But in that moment, something shifted within him. He realized that his anger wasn't just hurting Ayatond, it was also hurting him. It was keeping him trapped in the past, unable to move forward, unable to heal. I'm sorry, Tond whispered, his voice filled with regret. I've been so selfish. I've hurt you both, and I didn't even realize it. I've been holding on to my grief, and I thought it would keep me close to Amina. But all it's done is push everyone away. Iriti nodded, tears in her eyes. It's never too late, Tond. You can still be the man I know you are. You can still be the grandfather Ayatond deserves. For the first time in a long while, Tond allowed himself to feel the depth of his loss without letting it define him. He knew the road to healing would be long, but with Iriti's support, he was willing to try. Slowly but surely, he began to let Ayatond back into his heart. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when his pain resurfaced, but he learned to open up to the child who needed him. He began to spend more time with Ayatond, talking to her, playing with her, and, most importantly, loving her as his granddaughter. In time, Tond and Ayatond formed a bond, one that was built not on the memory of what was lost, but on the hope of what could still be. Iriti, too, began to heal, watching as the man she loved slowly returned to her, and as Ayatond found the family she had longed for, a voice for the voiceless. As Ayatond grew older, she began to understand more about the circumstances of her birth. She wasn't just a little girl who loved to play with her friends, she was also the product of a deeply painful past, a past that included the loss of her mother, Amina, and the strained relationship between her grandparents. Ayatond had always been told she was special, that her mother's love lived on in her, but as she reached her teenage years, the weight of her origins became harder to ignore. She often found herself asking questions. Why had her mother died so young? Why was her grandfather so distant, even cold, toward her? She felt as though she didn't quite fit into her own family, as if there were pieces of her past that no one wanted to talk about. She would overhear conversations between Iriti and Tond, hushed tones filled with grief and regret. Ayatond could feel the sorrow that lingered between them, the unspoken words that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The confusion grew with each passing day. Sometimes, when she looked at her grandfather, she saw a man who was consumed by his past, a man who couldn't let go of the hurt that defined him. And other times, when she looked at her grandmother, she saw the strength that had been passed down to her. Iriti was her rock, always there to guide her, to comfort her, and to remind her that she was not to blame for what had happened. You are not the reason your mother is gone, Ayatond, Iriti would say softly, brushing Ayatond's hair back from her face. You are a gift, a blessing, and you deserve all the love in the world. Yet, despite Iriti's comforting words, Ayatond couldn't help but feel a deep, lingering sadness. She had grown up with the shadow of her mother's loss, and though she loved her family, she often felt like an outsider, disconnected from the joy and laughter that she had longed for. One evening, as Ayatond sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she found herself overcome with emotion. Why does it hurt so much? She whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Why can't things just be normal? It was then that Iriti joined her, sitting beside her and placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay to feel this way, Ayatond," Iriti said, her voice steady and soothing. "Your pain is real, and it's something we can't ignore. But remember, you are not responsible for the tragedies of the past. You are not to blame for what happened to your mother. You have every right to grieve, to feel lost, but you must also know that you are loved." Those words were a turning point for Ayatond. She realized that while she couldn't change her past, she could control what she did with her future. She decided that if she was going to heal, she would have to use her pain to make a difference. She would no longer stay silent about the struggles her family had faced. She wanted to be a voice for the voiceless, for the young girls who, like her mother, had been betrayed by the system, by society, and by the people they trusted the most. Ayatond began to speak out. She joined local groups that focused on raising awareness about teenage pregnancy, child abuse, and the importance of education for girls. She began to share her story, how she had lost her mother, how her grandfather had been distant, and how, despite the pain, she had found strength through her grandmother. Her message was clear: no girl should ever feel that she was a product of tragedy, nor should she be blamed for the sins of others. Her speeches were met with a mixture of support and skepticism. Some members of the village applauded her courage, while others were hesitant to speak about the issues she raised. But Ayatond wasn't deterred. She knew that change didn't come easily, and she was determined to help others who had been through similar struggles. "I want to make sure no girl has to live in the shadows of shame," she said one evening at a community gathering. "No girl should ever feel like she is invisible, or like her voice doesn't matter. We all have a right to be heard, to live without fear, and to dream without limitations." Iriti stood proudly by her granddaughter's side, offering her unwavering support. She knew the road would be difficult, but she believed in Ayatond's strength and resilience. Together, they became voices for change in their community, advocating for young girls who had been silenced by their circumstances. As Ayatond gained recognition for her advocacy, she began to see how her own healing process was intertwined with the lives of the people she was helping. For Tond, watching Ayatond's journey was a bitter reminder of his own shortcomings. He had been distant and angry for so long, unable to let go of his grief. But as he witnessed Ayatond's courage, his heart began to soften. He realized that his granddaughter, the child he had once rejected, was a symbol of hope, a reminder that the future could still be bright, even after all that had happened. Tond began to make an effort to be more present in Ayatond's life. He attended some of her community meetings, listened to her speak, and for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of pride. His anger and bitterness slowly began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. He was healing, not just for himself, but for his granddaughter as well. He knew he had a role to play in her life, and he was determined to be a better grandfather. Ayatond's work continued to gain momentum. She became a well-known advocate in the village, and her story inspired many others. She was no longer just a girl with a painful past, she was a young woman with a voice that demanded to be heard. She had transformed her pain into something powerful, and she had given her family a renewed sense of hope. As Ayatond stood before a crowd at a community event, sharing her story once again, Iriti and Tond watched from the sidelines, their hearts full of pride. Ayatond had become the woman Amina had dreamed of, strong, resilient, and determined to make the world a better place. In that moment, they all understood that the past, though painful, did not define them. It was the love they had for each other, the strength they found in their shared struggles, that would carry them forward into a brighter future. A dream reborn. Years passed in the village of Oloren, and Ayatond blossomed into a young woman with a heart full of purpose. Her childhood had been filled with challenges, but she had never allowed the pain of her past to dictate her future. Iriti, her grandmother, had raised her with love and wisdom, always reminding her of the strength that lay within her. You are your mother's legacy, Iriti would say, and you carry her dreams in your heart. Ayaton had grown up with those words etched in her mind. Her mother, Amina, had always dreamed of becoming a doctor, of helping others, of making a difference in the world. It had been a dream that was cut short by tragedy, but Ayaton had made it her mission to fulfill it. She had dedicated herself to her studies, excelling in every subject, driven by the love of her mother and the desire to make her proud. It was not easy. There were days when Ayaton would feel the weight of her loss, the emptiness of not having Amina by her side to share her victories and struggles. There were days when the memory of her grandfather's coldness and anger would resurface, making her question her worth. But Ayaton refused to let those moments define her. She had a larger purpose. She was determined to become the doctor her mother had always dreamed of being. She faced many challenges along the way, from financial difficulties to emotional pain, but each obstacle only fueled her resolve. With the support of her grandmother, Iriti, and the growing pride she felt in herself, Ayaton overcame every hurdle. She earned a scholarship to attend a prestigious medical school, and with each passing year, she proved to herself that she was capable of achieving greatness. Through it all, she carried the memory of her mother close to her heart. Amina's dream was never far from her thoughts, and every time Ayaton put on her white coat or held a stethoscope in her hand, she felt as though her mother's spirit was guiding her. But Ayaton's journey wasn't just about personal achievement, it was about making a difference in the lives of others. She saw firsthand the struggles faced by young girls and women in her community, the same struggles her mother had faced, and she knew she had to give back. As a medical doctor, Ayaton worked tirelessly to improve the health and well-being of those around her. She became a beacon of hope in Oloran, advocating for women's health, education, and the rights of young girls to have a future beyond the constraints of their circumstances. Her success brought hope to the community. People began to see that even in the face of tragedy, new beginnings were possible. Ayaton had proven that with determination, resilience, and love, one could rise above the darkest of past and create a future filled with promise. For Tond, seeing Ayaton's success was both a moment of pride and bittersweet reflection. The pain he had carried for so many years was slowly being replaced by a deep admiration for the young woman his granddaughter had become. Tond, now a changed man, had worked hard to let go of the anger and bitterness that had once consumed him. He had learned to forgive, not just Ayaton, but himself as well. His journey of healing had been long and difficult, but as he watched his granddaughter walk across the stage at her graduation ceremony, he knew that he had found redemption. The day Ayaton graduated from medical school was a day of celebration, not just for her, but for her entire family. Iriti stood proudly beside her, tears of joy streaming down her face, knowing that her daughter's dream had been fulfilled through her granddaughter's hard work. Tond, too, was there, standing in the back of the crowd, his eyes filled with pride as Ayaton received her diploma. It was a moment of healing for the entire family, a moment when the past finally gave way to the future. As Ayaton stood at the podium, her diploma in hand, she looked out over the crowd. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the love and support she had received from those who had helped her get to this point. But more than anything, she felt a sense of peace knowing that her mother's dream had been reborn through her. Amina's spirit lived on in her, and she had fulfilled what had once seemed like an impossible dream. In her speech, Ayaton shared her journey with the audience, speaking of the struggles her family had faced, the loss of her mother, and the importance of never giving up. "This is not just my dream," she said, her voice steady and filled with emotion. "It is my mother's dream. And it is the dream of every girl who has ever been told she cannot achieve something because of where she comes from. I stand here today, not just as a doctor, but as a testament to the power of resilience, love, and the belief that no matter what happens, we can always rise again." Her words resonated with everyone in the room, and as she finished her speech, the audience erupted in applause. It wasn't just a celebration of her academic achievement. It was a celebration of everything she had overcome, everything she had become, and everything she still hoped to achieve. Tond, who had once struggled to show Ayaton the love she deserved, now felt nothing but pride and admiration for her. He had seen the power of forgiveness and redemption in her journey, and he knew that the future was now brighter than it had ever been. As Ayaton walked off the stage, her grandmother wrapped her in a warm embrace. "You did it, my dear," Iriti whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You've made your mother proud." Ayaton smiled, holding her grandmother close. "No, Grandma," she said softly. "We've made her proud. And now we begin a new chapter. Together." The story of Ayaton's journey was not just one of personal success, it was a story of healing, love, and the power of second chances. It was a reminder that even in the face of loss and tragedy, there is always hope for a new beginning. Ayaton had not only fulfilled her mother's dream, but she had given her family a renewed sense of purpose, a purpose that would continue to inspire generations to come.